So, hello everybody. My name is Nicolas. We're coming to you here from Vancouver. Today we're speaking to Lesley Telford. Lesley is a choreographer, she's a performer and a teacher, and she's my friend. So Lesley's background is that she's from Vancouver. She's danced for Les Grands Ballets Canadien in Montreal, Compania Nacional de Danza in Madrid, Nederlands Dans Theater. I'm going to talk to you actually, not to the camera. Nederlands Dans Theater in Holland. As a choreographer, she's created for Nederlands Dans Theater 1, which is the main company of the Nederlands Dans Theater. Compania Nacional de Danza in Madrid, Corso Theater also in Holland, Hubbard Street Dance Company 2 in Chicago, Ballet BC in Vancouver, and other places. As an educator, she has facilitated workshops in Canada, Spain, the Netherlands, Sweden, Italy, and anywhere else?
Oh, there's a few, but I'm not sure.
You received the Vancouver Mayor's Arts Award for Dance as an Emerging Artist, nominated by your colleague, Crystal Pite.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is special to
We're just
be chosen
name dropping
by her.
here. So the first question is, where did you grow up?
Grew up here in Vancouver, and I danced here for years. And when I had graduated high school, then I moved to Montreal. But when I was here, I had some fantastic teachers, and who got us out performing for retirement homes all the time, and we were performing constantly. So that was really exciting as a young
Was that
person.
like a classical ballet situation?
I suppose it was officially a classical ballet situation, but I feel like my first teacher was more about just perform.
Okay.
Yes,
Nice.
her husband would write text for us to speak, and
Nice.
so she just wanted us to get out there and get used to being on a stage in front of an audience and just share it. And to not make it into this once a year precious experience that everything has to be perfect, because I feel like that actually brings a lot more stress with it. And
there's no room for mistakes.
And now it's also the situation with working with younger people, like get them out and perform as much as you can, just so that it's second nature, and you're not dealing with like the fear factor of
For sure.
of performing.
Do you have any memories from your like young age, something that hooked you into the performance, or maybe seeing something, something like mind-blowing, kind of like, whoa, like something?
I just remember we saw so many performances back then in Vancouver. I think there was also, giving credit to the impresario at the time, they actually brought in a lot of big classical ballets to Vancouver. When I was growing up, we saw a lot of great performances, and I was in awe, and I was very focused on this classical side. I've kind of focused on a more contemporary field, and in that moment, I didn't even know what that was, or I wasn't interested at all. I was really interested in pure classical ballet and the perfection of it, and that attention to every detail. And so I think there was a few ballets I had seen that that was the big inspiration. I think the fact that I'd seen it, I don't know if I would have felt the same if I hadn't had access to being like an audience member. So I do think that's like a huge impact.
I mean, most people that I talk to either have an experience where they witnessed something, or an experience where they're actually done something in their field, which was kind of like, for me, I have a distinct memory of being 5 years old, and like digging through Lego blocks with my brother and my sister, and we would get into these chants with like invented language, and it would kind of be like a little bit like trance music, like, and we would,
fabulous.
I think I have a feeling that the time would just fly past, and throughout my adult life, I'm always trying to go back to that feeling as just a 5-6 year old, because it was very transcendent, or
Right.
I guess that's the word.
Yeah,
But
because
I
there are those experiences as well. Like I'm thinking of like those influences from outside, but yeah, my sister also danced.
Yeah.
And so we would dance together in our living room with the cassette player. And sometimes we'd make up dances, but sometimes they'd be dances we had learned for some performance. And we would practice in our living room, and it had huge windows so that when it was night, you could almost use them as a mirror.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, we
There you
spent
go.
lots of hours in that living room.
Well, that's
I have a feeling those were the most intense rehearsal times we've had. Sometimes,
yeah, sisters can be intense. Like,
yeah.
now we're doing it this way.
I think she still has nightmares about it.
Basically, you started making stuff there, in a way.
Yeah, but
As
it was
simple as it might have been.
some simple things then. And I wonder if that's the culture of ballet. Like, it was very much a do as you're told environment. It was not like freedom, make anything you want. Even though I really value the creativity of some of my first teachers, but there were rare moments when we would make something ourselves.
Yeah.
And it was almost like relegated to like, oh, that was just playing, you know?
Yeah.
We would practice what we were given.
Yeah.
And by developing that, like, sure, there's your own interpretation added onto that, but and we would do festivals, we would do these competitions, and within that there was one that was improvisation. So they would play a piece of music, you get to listen to it once, and then you have to dance.
Okay.
And those were like pressure moments, but
And this would be more contemporary kind of style, or whatever you
end up doing. And I think it was just a bit of a free-for-all because we didn't have any improvisation training at all.
So you didn't have any preparation for that. It's
No,
just like
you
what
kind
happens
of
in the moment.
threw yourself into it.
Okay.
And see what happens.
How did you feel about it?
It made me nervous because I liked the control aspect of knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah.
In later years, I kind of found that more exciting, but it's also like a skill base that you feel like you have tools that you can now play with in improvisational settings. But in that moment, it was you do whatever happens.
Yeah, it can be pretty intimidating if you've never done it.
Yeah.
Just a little distinction for people who might not know, including me. Classical dance, modern dance, contemporary. What are they, and what are the misconceptions that people have? I know this is a big question, but maybe...
It's a huge question. It's like the unanswerable question. I was participating in this fellowship in the University of Zurich last year with the question, what is contemporary dance?
Yeah.
And a group of people involved in contemporary dance got together for about 10 days and came up with no answers. Basically, just the term suggests, anything that's made now.
Okay.
So
perfect.
It removes the stylistic question of it might be through a classical idiom. It might be through something that is what you would consider more modern. I find the word modern has connotations to a certain time in a certain era.
Yeah.
Or it does for me.
Okay.
It refers back to the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
And I really don't. I'm really not fond of the term postmodern.
Okay.
So, if we
The
can
hipster
kind of
thing to
go
say,
with the
postmodern.
yes, exactly. So if we can go with the term contemporary, that kind of covers all bases, right? Because it's like anything that you're making now, and which is always going to stem from influences from the past.
Yeah.
And what is relevant to, it doesn't always need to be relevant to all of society, but it, just like even on a personal level, this is relevant to where you're at this present time and what you're wanting to make with the people in front of you.
Sometimes I feel it may be a little bit like, it's kind of like music. I don't know if it's Miles Davis who said it. It's like, don't talk about music. Music, you shouldn't talk about it. Just listen to it, and that's what it is. And maybe with dance, it's like, You just need to see the piece and then put it in your own label if you want in your head. Like that's what it is, you know.
And there's like a huge stylistic variety, and it's so personal. So it's impossible, I find, to label it.
Great. Let's talk about creative processes as a performer when you're working with a choreographer and you've had a chance to work with great choreographers. And what kind of processes have you been exposed to through work with the choreographers? Is it the do as you're told situation?
Right.
Is it contribute something? Is it total freedom? Is it a whole spectrum of those things depending on the person? Completely. Can you just give us a little kind of overview of your experiences?
Well, when I first went to Spain, I worked with Nacho Duato, and he was very much, he was incredibly fast at coming up with material. So it was watch and copy, and he built a lot of the material on his own body. It felt like whatever came out naturally and very connected to the music. So whatever came out naturally for him was what you're trying to like capture as quickly as you possibly can, because the moment that he realized you didn't get something, he'll change it, and you're like, no, that was great. Give me 2 seconds and I'll get it. Yeah. So it was very much very, very specific and following what he suggests.
Sure.
Then going to work with Yuri Killian, it was a complete shift for me. He had, in the past, he had been very much showing steps, you do them. And he changed in his process of how he worked with dancers quite drastically. And he would suggest a mood or a state of mind or even a situation that you can start playing with, and I felt like with the raw material that you offer, he would start to sculpt it. And it's because there was so much partnering, it was also very dependent on what was built between that couple or that. So that was, at first I felt like treading on eggshells, like, oh, I can try things, and do I trust myself to try things? And almost getting over your own editor. Yeah. So that you can be quicker to offer material. Like I felt like I didn't grow up with that. And as these kids are here, like growing up with being part of creative processes where you're really contributing. I felt like I learned that much later, which is when I started to choreograph, because I realized, oh, wow, this is so much more satisfying to be able to contribute to a very rare and special environment that was being created, but that your input was being welcomed and shaped in a way that you had never imagined your input being shaped. And so it was, he would have never labeled that a collaboration, but it was some of the most collaborative processes I've been in. I was just going to say that it really sounds like a collaboration, maybe with one person taking directorship of it. Completely. For their vision. But. He was extremely, and that's where I find there's a
gray zone.
There's a gray zone, or there's like this contradictory, like the more clear like perhaps someone in the director or choreographer role is, the greater clarity brought to the situation almost allows for greater generosity.
The contributors of the material and all.
Exactly. Okay. And you would think that almost by being less clear about the direction, it allows more space for that. I find that leaves like a lot of unanswered questions, and actually his specificity allowed for it to become something beyond what he had maybe originally planned, and beyond what we could have designed with his input. Like I felt like it was a perfect example of it being more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And so that was quite a special environment. And I think that was like a hugely transformative for me.
So you were saying in that period you started choreographing yourself. Okay.
Before that, I didn't dare trust myself.
Okay. So through those processes, you started to get self-confidence about making things? Was there any also like turning points, like, you know, like tipping points where you're like, oh, I want to do this myself?
I think it was not only self-confidence, but awe of the creative process at its best. And you just are so curious that you're like, well, if I could just play with that a little bit more, like that process was so exciting. Why don't I invite a few people into the studio and let's do that ourselves for a little while?
Yeah.
And I felt like even as a dancer, those moments of like surpassing, I tend to think of it not just as self-confidence, but that your curiosity for something else is so much greater than your fears.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden the fears became negligible. Not that they don't exist, but it's more that like your will to do something else is so much greater than your fears.
Yeah. That's a perfect way of putting it. So, is there any like simple way you can express your own process as a choreographer when you're working with dancers?
I think it's very much influenced by my past, and I tend to. Depends how much time we have. No, I don't mean our time. I mean how much time of creative process we have.
Okay, yeah.
It's because.
Well, that's an interesting point, actually. How does time and quote unquote deadlines also influence the creative process?
Yeah, that is tricky, because sometimes I think with less time you have to be slightly more precise and maybe give some already built phrases to be able to work with, and that you can really start from scratch if you have more time.
Yeah.
Sometimes those already built phrases become almost more time consuming than something that stems from the dancers you're working with.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things of just having instincts in the moment of like, which way do we go? In my own process, I think I do some task-based material of maybe describing a situation, getting them to build their own material through that visualization. Some of it asking the dancers to contribute their own story-based ideas that relate to the theme but are more specifically personal, and building material off of their specific personal experiences with that theme. Like with Ballet BC, it was theme of the accident, or those few split seconds before a close call. And so I asked them to kind of go through their own personal experiences of the close call, or an accident, or an almost accident, or so they built material around that. And then I also built material with those things in mind, and we sometimes will take a phrase just so that we have an aesthetic common ground, and manipulate it and play with it and convert that into something more personal.
Perfect.
Just a second. Can we start over this little section, and then I can do better?
It's so funny because even I was like, maybe I need to re-record the question, because it was like
No, like, let's do a cut, and then I can answer better.
So let's talk about your work with young dancers, students, pre-professionals. You're working at Arts Umbrella in Vancouver, and last year you had made a piece that was pretty much entirely the material generated by the young dancers. Was that the first time you did something, or had you already worked with them in a similar capacity?
I have done pieces with young dancers before, actually, that weren't even dancers. Just I'd worked with young people creating a piece with their material.
Nice.
So that was not the first time, but it was the first time actually working with such young dance students in that capacity. And it stemmed from, I was asked to make a piece for a performance opportunity they had, and we had a long-term process of doing contemporary classes as well as ballet classes, and I had gotten to know them quite well. And we had been working on some improvisation skills, and I felt like, well, this would be a perfect opportunity to make it more like a composition class. Then I felt like that would be more useful for them than me making a piece and teaching it to them. Like it felt like that wasn't the right role to play. And so we talked about what we wanted to do and the theme, and we developed together, we discussed what are some of the tasks that could relate to that theme. So I felt like it was a learning experience for me as well to see how we were able to accomplish that. I helped them arrange it spatially. I made a few decisions regarding that, and kind of was the person who overviewed the process. And so they really brainstormed some tasks, and we discussed it together. Okay, let's stick to those 8. And it was about how one mind can control another body.
That was the theme.
That was the theme we were dealing with. So it was, okay, we can get it to hover, float, it can fall, it can roll, it could freeze, it could, so they tasked each other.
Nice.
So one asked another one to dance, and they wrote a list of what they wanted them to do. And so they built phrases like this, and assisted in constructing, and even with like the title and what they were wearing. And I gave them 2 choices of music. I brought it down to 2 and just said, okay, for you, choose one. And I did the same process with 2 different classes, and they chose 2 different pieces of music. And they turned into quite different pieces on the same theme. And that was quite interesting.
Same theme, different music, different pieces.
Nice. Same title. We used the same title.
But it sounds like you basically were there to facilitate maybe overcoming, or maybe suggest ways of overcoming obstacles, but more you were kind of like getting out of the way.
I was, but at the same time I was like insisting on whatever your choices are, push them further, and so that it's a deeper experience. And I know from being in those types of situations as a dancer, it's a lot of the doubt comes from maybe I didn't make the right choice. Even as a choreographer, the doubt's maybe that's not the right thing to do there. And often the only mistake you can make is not following through with your choice in a committed enough way. And so what I was really enforcing with them is, okay, if that's your choice, 200%. Follow that choice 200%. And so you can really take ownership of it. And so I was kind of still a slave driver.
You gotta do that.
But in order for them to almost take over the ownership to a greater degree, and not just take those choices superficially, but and so that was quite interesting, and I was really excited to see what happened with them taking over and how involved they were in. I got some nice notes afterwards that it was a special experience for them to build it.
I'm sure it was. Is there anything that particularly stands out as a memory of maybe somebody was shy, that all of a sudden they came out with a certain side to themselves that's, more powerful, or or somebody, you know what I mean, like kind of transformative.
I don't have a total transformative memory, but it's like a long-term transformation. Over that, it was also my first time of connecting with younger students over the course of a year, and that was satisfying for me. That what we spoke about and what was communicated over the course of the year, you realize there's a greater understanding by the end of that that period that you can't achieve in short-term workshops that I had as in the role of a teacher or in the role of even in the role of a choreographer. It's short-term, and this was connecting teaching experience to putting something on stage. I took myself out of the role of a choreographer in that case, but still helping them kind of develop a work to put on stage. And that was that long-term, it was a long-term transformative process that I realized echoes with them, and working with them still, I realize what has been built, and that's been very exciting.
And it's a good point, like a one-shot workshop can be very impactful, but you always want to go back and follow through, and I have the same problem with music workshops.
Right.
Like if it's a one-shot, it's let's just try and get them, you know, like
Excited.
Flash exposed,
Yes.
But it's really interesting to watch a long-term process and how they, when they come back to each session, their mindset is already in it. They're and maybe in between the sessions, you know, either consciously or subconsciously, they're kind of developing things. You know, their minds are working on it.
Exactly, and that's what I find so special about dance and shared processes in music. And it's not just about the individual's experience. It's about creating an atmosphere that you're kind of almost building on this atmosphere and teamwork to a certain degree, whether or not they're having a direct connection or not. It's what's happening in the room that's important. And more so than just an individual development.
Definitely. How do they deal with accepting other people's ideas, maybe the group rejecting an idea in a nice way or maybe in a not nice way? I mean, you know, I guess
they were quite polite with each other, but I also felt like as a whole, as an entire group, they took on the responsibility. And I think too often, also being a mother, I think too often we underestimate the degree of responsibility children actually want to have, and are capable of.
Exactly.
And the amount of then along with that responsibility that they're able to be creative and make choices, I felt like gave them more trust in themselves, and like the next time they're faced with a situation like that, I'm like, oh, we can do it. We did the last one.
One of my most impressive experiences was working with a group of 9-year-olds in the Netherlands. It was like an after-school creative workshop once a week, and after the first couple of sessions, they were but they're 9.
Right.
They had the most amazing abstract ideas. They had clear choices. They had, no, we want this, we don't want this. This is how we're going to solve this. And honestly, I listened back to the recordings, and it's just magical what they came up with. And it was what you said about the responsibility. They wanted it. They wanted the bar set high, and they wanted this challenge of yes, we're reaching it, and that was great. Actually, how do you deal with that kind of setting the bar in terms of quality and focus? We talked about this earlier, how difficult of a question it is. You did say you were a slave driver, which I'm a total slave driver with kids I work with, and I don't want to be apologetic about it. I'm like, well, somebody's got to kick their ass. And how do you like balance that with at the same time being positive and kind of, you know, building their self-esteem?
I feel like I don't want to be positive for the wrong reason. So I'll be positive when I find some of those ideas have been applied or have been owned or have been, and sometimes I worry about being too, it's not just disciplinarian, it's to strive for a certain excellence or a certain maximization of what is possible in that moment with that child or group of children or adults.
No, it's true.
So to not go with the simple, whatever's the easiest result of this moment, to be the one in the room that's fighting for that's the special magical moments that are created through a certain intensity that are not achieved necessarily the easiest way, but and I don't mean of that we have to like beat ourselves up about it, but the attention and focus on details can be very special, and I think that there's a great capacity for that, and it's just like waking it up.
Yeah, for sure.
And I realize the more I'm going back and forth between a professional world and this environment of working with younger people, I don't really feel like that we should be treating them differently. Yes, there's an understanding that maybe they won't be doing it professionally, but if we're going to spend time on it, isn't it the time worthwhile that we're maximizing what we're achieving? And actually, they'll probably have more fun with it in the end if they are achieving something beyond what they thought they could.
Yeah.
So, as tough as it might be to kind of go through that, I do think there is fun at the end of it, just the same as you don't want to kill the fun out of it with professional dancers either. It should be a very refined playground. Ideally.
For sure. And it's so important to learn the value of doing something with quality, you know, just really, like you say, pay attention to the details, you know, insist, and that twinkle in the eye of the kids or whoever when they really do a good job, because it's a product of also consistently doing something with quality and learning the discipline that don't just let something go, you know, every move you make, like strive for the perfection and perfection, strive for improvement and growth.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And there is pride that comes along with that, and we are in this certain society that is that doesn't want to judge children, and I don't want to judge children either, but it's also not necessarily politically correct to push to be accepting and saying that's great, that's fine, that's nice. But I think there's more potential than that. And I'm on an anti-mediocrity campaign. Yes.
Me too.
I think they can, and despite varying levels of talent, there are ways in which each person can find their own intensity and their own contribution and their own creativity within all of it.
For sure.
It's true. I feel like I'm dealing with that right now with my daughter, even, that she likes to do things she's good at, and and veers away from things that she has to work on to improve herself upon. And I feel like we're in that process of saying, well, there is such a huge value in following through and finding that daily focus, and then you'll find the result in the end. And nobody's naturally a concert pianist.
Yeah. Do you think that
and there is that follow through?
Oh yeah. Do you think that you've learned that from your classical ballet education?
Absolutely.
Because it's very structured, very disciplined.
And you build upon skills learned previous, and it's a continually, it's like a slowly climbing hill. and you're continually reanalyzing it. You've never arrived.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
End of your life or whatever until you're doing it.
Going along with your cane. You've never arrived.
Well, that's true.
And the moment you think you have, that's like the biggest mistake you can make, right? To not continually challenge or searching for refinement or evolution of what you're doing.
And it's interesting when you think about most of the when I think about the artists, masters that I really admire, they did that their whole lives.
Right.
They were always changing, and not in a Madonna kind of way,
right?
But just like growing.
New look.
Point.
No, and I think that was amazing with, I brought him up a lot, but Yuri Killian is that he, despite all his past successes, continually searched for another way to craft his art, and other methodologies, and he kept searching, and that was what was quite so admirable about his process.
Do you feel that you're trying to cultivate that approach too?
I don't want to put myself on that level of comparison, but it's something I really admire, and I hope to continue to challenge myself in those ways as well.
Well, I didn't mean.
And others.
Yeah.
I feel that we are as good as our community in a way, and you can find yourself in different roles within that community, but it's not an individual. At least, I mean, I know writers are able to kind of exist more in their own minds, and they can be independent. Yeah. Potentially, a painter can be independent, and not that they're not engaged with their world, but I feel like in what we do, we're as good as our relationships with the people around us, and because it's not built alone. I mean, yes, you could do a solo performance and do that completely separate, but I feel like unless there's input and output, I feel like that's how we're building our craft, and that exchange is actually everything. Yeah. Or I find huge value in that. Yes.
Yeah. Who are some of the artists that you admire consistently, let's say?
Not necessarily within my own field.
No, not necessarily in your own field at all, actually, especially considering we just mentioned the whole cross-pollination.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Well, there's a writer I just adore, and Anne Carson, and she also, I've shared some of her work with you guys, and also because she speaks about this cross-pollination and converting an inspiration from one medium to another, and I find too often, at least in dance, we work in our own bubble. It becomes the studio, and what's outside of it becomes secondary. And I think anyone who can kind of break down those walls and find value in that kind of the transference from one idiom to another, I think that's really beautiful. Bill Viola, who I adore his work because of how specific and precise it is and how communicative it can be. Let me think. I wasn't prepared for this one.
It's a big question. It's a big question.
I'm going to go home and go, I missed so many people.
It's okay. 2 names, 2 good names is better than 100 bad ones. Well, this was really great. I'm glad that we did this. It was nice talking to you in this
to talk to you.
semi-informal situation. Mull over these things. I hope the listeners and viewers will get something out of it, and I'm sure they will. There's a lot of gold in this. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Nicolas.
And maybe we'll follow up with another one in a couple of years and see where you're at then.
Sounds good. Then it's a challenge to keep transforming.
All right.
Okay.
Cut.